joining. We are not. So can we turn off the recording? Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining this last installment of Women's Declaration International USA's webinar series, Living the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. We've been doing this all year and it's December 2022. And we're really ready to start the discussion on Article 9, reaffirming the need for the protection of the rights of the child. This is going to be a great discussion here tonight, everyone. I'm really excited for it. So I'm just going to start us off by reading Article 9 of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, and then we'll get started with the conversation. In all actions concerning children, whether undertaken by public or private social welfare institutions, courts of law, administrative authorities, or legislative bodies, the best interests of the child shall be a primary consideration. States should recognize that medical interventions aimed at the gender reassignment of children by the use of puberty-suppressing drugs, cross-sex hormones, and surgery do not serve the best interests of children. Children are not developmentally competent to give full, free, and informed consent to such medical interventions, which carry a high risk of long-term adverse consequences to the physical and psychological health of the child, and which may result in permanent adverse consequences such as sterility. States should prohibit the use of such medical interventions upon children. States should recognize that medical interventions aimed at the gender reassignment of children by the use of drugs and surgery are emerging harmful practices as defined by Part 5 of the Joint General Recommendation number 31 of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and General Comment number 18 of the Committee on the Rights of the Child on Harmful Practices. States should establish data collection and monitoring processes in relation to these practices and enact and implement legislation aimed at eliminating them. States' provisions should include legal protection and appropriate care for children harmed by such practices and the availability of redress and reparations. States should recognize the right of the child to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health and to facilities for the treatment of illness and rehabilitation of health. This should include protection of the healthy body of the child from the use of drugs or surgery to effect gender reassignment treatment. States should ensure that the institutions, services, and facilities responsible for the care or protection of children shall conform with the standards established by competent authorities, particularly in the areas of safety and health. This should include preventing organizations that promote the concept of gender identity or constituencies that have no clinical expertise or child psychology background from influencing health services for children. States should respect the responsibilities, rights, and duties of parents, or where applicable, legal guardians or other persons legally responsible for the child to provide in a manner consistent with the evolving capacities of the child, appropriate direction and guidance in the exercise by the child of the rights recognized in the present convention. States should prohibit state agencies, public and private bodies, medical practitioners, and other child welfare professionals from taking any action which seeks to compel parents to consent to medical or other interventions aimed at changing the gender identities of their children. States should recognize the right of the child to education with a view to achieving this right progressively and on the basis of equal opportunity. This should include the right of the child to the development of school curricula, which are materially accurate about human biology and reproduction and include information about the human rights of people of diverse sexual orientations, taking into account the evolving capacity and psychological developmental stages of the child. States should ensure inclusion in teacher training and continuing professional development programs of accurate material about human biology and reproduction and information about the human rights of people of diverse sexual orientations. States agree that the education of the child shall be directed to the preparation of the child for responsible life in a free society in the spirit of understanding peace, tolerance, and equality of sexes. This should include measures to ensure that organizations are not allocated state funding to promote sex stereotyping and the concept of gender identity in educational institutions, as this constitutes the promotion of discrimination against women and girls. Finally, states shall protect the child against all forms of exploitation prejudicial to any aspects of the child's welfare. This should include effective and appropriate legal measures with a view to abolishing traditional and emerging practices which enforce sex role stereotyping on girls and boys, diagnosing and treating children as having been, quote, born in the wrong body when they do not conform to traditional sex role stereotypes, identifying young people who are same-sex attracted as suffering from gender dysphoria, and using medical interventions on children, which may result in their sterilization or other permanent harms. That is the language of Article 9 of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. And I am so thrilled to announce that we have with us this evening Chloe Cole, who will tell her story of transition and detransition. I know she's got some opinions about the use of that language. Brette Smith, who went through a harrowing experience involving her daughter, and Jeannette Cooper, one of the co-founders of Partners for Ethical Care, herself a mother who's had similar experiences with her daughter in the system. So with that, I will turn it over to Chloe. Chloe, if you want to turn on your audio and video, that would be great. We're excited to hear from you.
Thank you for having me here as a panelist.
Go ahead, anytime.
Yeah, I suppose I'll start by giving my account of my story. So a little background, I transitioned as a minor. I'm 18 years old right now, but I started experiencing gender dysphoria at around 11 or 12, and I got the diagnosis for it at 12, and just within a matter of months, I was able to get on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones at 13. And then shortly after I started using a binder, and then at 15, in my sophomore year, I got a double mastectomy, and not even a year after, when I was 16, I stopped transitioning. So I mean, when I was a kid, I was all things considered pretty normal. I was, I guess you'd say, a stereotypical girl in some ways. I liked wearing dresses and skirts and playing dress up in color pink and playing with my older sister's Bratz and Barbie dolls. But, I'm the youngest of 5 kids. I've got 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters. And so I had influence from either sex. And I also had a bit of a tomboyish streak in me because of my older brothers and my dad. I often played video games with them, and I liked playing with like their Legos, their toy trucks, their toy guns. And, I did kind of struggle with socializing and in school a little bit growing up. And I found that I never really got along with other girls. And once I started to get older, especially as I got into middle school and I started hitting puberty, I found that this effect started to get more dramatic, and I started to become more and more tomboyish, and eventually got to the point that I didn't really have any friends who were female. At least I wasn't very close to them, or I found that I didn't really like them, relate to them very much. And I started to wonder if there was something wrong with me, and I didn't really know like what it was that was setting me apart from the other girls. And at roughly the same time, I started using the internet a lot more. I had pretty much completely unrestricted internet access. And at 11, I got my first phone, and I started using social media because all my other peers were doing the same thing. They were all on Snapchat, Instagram. They had like Kik. The platform I mainly used was Instagram. I started using it while I was well under the minimum age. I mean, the minimum age right now for it is 13, but they don't really have a means of verifying that. And so I was seeing things that really I shouldn't have been allowed to on the platform. Like a lot of content that was posted by other women or was featured by other featured of women, like the pictures they would post of themselves were very, it was in a very like idealized, very sexualized light a lot of the time. And you know, they're often like in very like sexual situations or poses, or they wore like very skimpy clothing or a lot of makeup, or they had either they were editing their pictures or they had plastic surgery done on like their faces and bodies. And I started to notice like there was this ideal of women that I wasn't really matching up to. And, you know, I was like, all these women had like very big, very curvaceous bodies, big hips, big breasts, big thighs, soft faces. And, you know, I was a kid, I wasn't too developed. I had very slender hips, very small. I was so on the smaller chested side, and I was also a little more on the athletic side. So I had a bit of muscle in my body and larger shoulders, and I liked having my hair short. So, you know, I started to feel like I don't really look like a woman. Like, I feel like I should just give up and maybe I'd be better off as a boy. And I also started to see that there was a way out of being a woman, because at the same time I was exposed to a lot of LGBTQ, specifically like trans and non-binary content, like other teens and young adults who identified as either of those. And it was almost always specifically teenage girls or like younger women who are posting this. And you know, as kind of an awkward kid who struggled with socialization and didn't really fit in, it just kind of it really struck me how these people who had a lot of my same feelings, a lot of my same struggles, were becoming more accepted amongst their peers, their friends, their families, and that they seemingly were finding their true selves through transitioning and becoming happier and building a community amongst themselves. And it filled me with hope. And it was something that secretly I kind of wish that I had for myself. And, you know, after seeing this stuff for quite a while and being at an age where, you know, I was starting to like branch out all my interests and wonder like what role in the world I would play as an adult, you know, I started to wonder like, just who am I? Like, who am I attracted to? What is my gender identity? And, you know, I kind of switched between labels such as like tomboy, demigirl, agender, bigender, until eventually it became, you know, I just don't think that I'm a girl. I think that I might actually be a boy. And I started to change my expression a little and slowly cut my hair shorter as time went on. And I came out to an older sister of mine, and she took me shopping, and I bought some more boy clothes. And eventually a few months after that, I decided that I wanted to come out to my parents, because I wanted to tell them the truth and go forward with my transition. And it was a very scary confession to make. I didn't know how they were going to react to this, if they were going to react negatively or not accept me. And you know, to kind of give me like a comfortable amount of space and an amount of time for them to really think it over and think of a response, I decided to write a letter and basically telling them that, you know, I'd like to be referred to by a new name and as your son and my siblings' brothers. And upon reading this and talking with me, they were shocked, because they knew that like I was I was a tomboy, but I mean, they never really expected this of me. I mean, just a few months before, I was dressing like a girl. I was presenting very femininely, and I had very long hair. And then all of a sudden, things started to change completely. And I mean, they loved me to death. They're my parents, and they wanted to support me however they could, but they didn't really know exactly how to do that. I mean, they're just normal people. They weren't really informed on the subject, and there wasn't really the amount of information on it at the time, and certainly not really anybody speaking against transition or the practice of transitioning children. This was about 5 years ago in 2017. So, they decided that they wanted to get to the bottom of it and figure out what to do from there. And they had me start going to a therapist with our healthcare provider. And pretty much immediately, my identity was just affirmed, and there wasn't really any questioning of the factors that might have been contributing to the development of my dysphoria. I got diagnosed with gender dysphoria by a gender specialist pretty soon afterward. And, I wanted to proceed with transition because it was like, I already knew that I was struggling with these feelings. It just confirmed what I already knew about myself. And I started talking to my parents. Like I told them, I really believe myself to be a boy, and I really want to start on testosterone so that my appearance reflects that. And they're cautious about this at first. Actually, they pushed back on this. They told me that, I was so young, and that I was trying to move too quickly, and that, since I was only 13, that it would probably be best to wait. But then the so-called specialists who were involved in my transition actually told them that transition was the only means of treating my dysphoria, and there is never any regard to any alternatives. And if I wasn't allowed to transition, then I would be at risk of committing suicide. And so they were effectively they were coerced into allowing me to transition medically and do as I please. And so I was referred to an endocrinologist a few months after my diagnosis. And the first endocrinologist who I had seen actually pushed back on this as well, but he was the only physician who really did. He said that, I was one of the youngest patients that he had seen who was asking, who was presented with gender dysphoria, and he felt like it was too early to start, that he didn't know how it may affect my brain development going forward. And so I didn't get the prescription for testosterone and blockers from him. But very easily, I was just referred to another endocrinologist who, after only a few appointments, gave me and my mom the consent forms to sign off on. And, I started with blockers first, and there is like a month-long period between starting that and the cross-sex hormones to basically just allow for my body to cease to make its natural hormone production. And during this period of time, as the sex hormones started to leave my body, I started to become slightly more depressed, a little more tired, and I started experiencing hot flashes as well, as if I were in menopause, because Lupron, the medication I was on, pretty much induces an artificial state of menopause. And I would experience this. They were very sporadic, very uncomfortable. I had no way of predicting when they would happen, really. So, I mean, it could happen at any time while I was either walking my dog or trying to focus on an assignment at school or trying to do my homework. And it did interfere with my daily life a little bit. And this went on for the duration that I was on blockers, which was for about like a year or so. And so when I started on testosterone, naturally I felt great because I finally had hormones back in my body and I had my energy back, and excuse me. And it was like I had this feeling of gender euphoria because I'd finally reached this big milestone that I'd been looking forward to. And I was really excited. I was really looking forward to all the changes that would come with it. The first of which would be, I think would have been the drop in my voice, which happened pretty quickly, I think within just a matter of weeks. And then eventually it became my hair and my eyebrows and my body hair getting thicker and more plentiful, and my body fat distribution changing into a more masculine form, and I started to develop more muscle as well. And a lot of my physical features, my bone structure has become more squarish over the years. And
Chloe, I just want to, we're going to come back to you for sure. I just want to make sure we get to hear from Brette and Jeannette, and then we'll definitely come back. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't really sure how to condense all this.
Oh, good. Hearing your story is incredible. So go ahead, but we'll come back after Brette and Jeannette.
All right.
No, go ahead. I want Chloe to be able to finish for a couple of minutes. Go ahead, Chloe. I'm sorry.
All right. So I started to go through the motions of medically transitioning. I mean, by this point in time, I actually hadn't come out to most of my peers, so they're shocked seeing all these changes and hearing my voice drop as if I were a boy. And it did have some social repercussions for me. I was in middle school at the time, and my peers were not exactly the nicest, and I did get some bullying from my peers, mostly the girls, but there also had been a boy who had been kind of harassing me over the course of that school year when I first started transitioning. And there actually was an incident in which he had assaulted me. He groped my chest, and that was when I started binding. For those of you who don't know, a binder is like a compression device that has compression fabric in the chest area, and it's made to basically hide the appearance of the breasts in women. And before I was barely developed, I had a relatively small chest, and I had been wearing like looser shirts, and I never thought that anybody would really notice or care. But it wasn't until this incident where I'd been assaulted that I became conscious of this area of my body and no longer wanted it to be visible or even have it as part of me. And so I started to hide it from the world. I'll leave off there.
All right, Chloe, thank you so much for sharing your story. There's a lot of really positive support going on in the chat, a lot of women sending a lot of support and love to you. And we definitely want to come back to hear the rest of your story. Brette, do you want to come on and say a little bit about your situation with your daughter?
Yes. Okay. So for those who don't know, her incident of getting involved in gender as an ideology online was, I would say in 2020, 2021. And it came to a head in June of 2022. When I found out about it, I helped her desist. I'll explain more about that. But that was a year ago. And then in September of this year, there was a hashtag trending, Young Gender Critical Women Unite. And this is on Twitter. So I had made a tweet just about my daughter. Oh, sorry, I should not have assumed that would work, but I will read it. It says that I didn't affirm my daughter. I removed her from the contagion. Within months, she pulled a cease and desist. She saw the truth about it and left the cult. Over a year later, she's thriving more than she ever was when involved in gender craze, hashtag Young GC Women Unite. And from there, it was just an absolutely massive spiral of activists on both sides, just, spreading this tweet like wildfire. I'm pretty sure by the end it was seen over 100,000 times, possibly more than that. And we'll never have a clear count because my Twitter was banned a week after that went viral for my feminist wrong thing, of course. But the beginning, I guess, where I want to start is that it is so important to let our children have a right to being healthy and not being medicalized or, being protected from decisions that are obviously too mature for them to be making. And unfortunately, the people who are supposed to help these children make these decisions that we're supposed to trust they're working against us. They're working against our kids. Our kids are not mature enough to make a lot of these choices for themselves. The only people who are going to help guide the children is parents. We are the ones who will always do whatever we need to keep our kids safe. Unfortunately, we are working against multi-billion-dollar medical industry. We're working against schools and school counselors and online influencers and social media and television media with these shows that have such glamorous trans people or, with real, just, they're making it such a mainstream thing that our kids see it all the time that 10 years ago, they may not have thought anything about gender. And now they're forced to make a decision about their identity before they've had an opportunity to figure out who they are for themselves. And as parents, we're their first line of defense. We are the only ones whose judgment we can really trust. And being that first line of defense to protect our children, we really have to make difficult decisions. When we're told to, we're being shown that this is such a glamorous thing, that this is a natural thing for a child to find their gender identity. And everywhere you see is telling you to affirm, to go along with this and encourage your child in finding their gender identity. And my story with my daughter Anna is that I did not affirm her. I went against all the advice that everyone had told us, kind of hoping for the best. And part of the threats we're told are that if you don't affirm your child, you could have a trans kid or a dead kid, and their risk of suicide is so high and you would be contributing to that. And I still thought, I just don't feel like this is right for her. And my child was one who did go on and make a suicide attempt. After I told her I wouldn't be affirming her, and I removed her from those friends, she ate a handful of my Xanax at the beginning of June of 2021. My husband and I found her the next morning in her bed, she's 90 pounds. She's a teeny tiny little thing, which was part of where her body dysphoria came from, is that she felt like her friends had hips and breasts, and she was so underdeveloped that people started telling her, maybe you're just a boy. And so we found her the next morning after eating this. We didn't obviously know she'd done this. And I really won't go into terrible detail about that because there is no way to actually describe what you see and feel and experience when you find your child at a suicide attempt. And sorry, it is just a lot that happened. And when she was in the hospital, one of the first things after she woke up, hours later, it was probably about 12 hours before she was really coherent enough to speak. And one of the first things she asked me was if her friends knew. And I do think there was the manipulation part to the suicide attempt. I think a lot of it too was these are friends who had told her, this is your logical step. If you're not affirmed, there's, that. And it really just helped me make the decision to still stand firm. I had the decision to make after her suicide attempt to think, okay, she believes this so strongly that she was willing to die for it. Or I could go route 2 and say that it doesn't matter if she believes this, clearly healthy people don't make the choice to try to die. And what was really, I think for me, what I think people find interesting, like when this went viral on Twitter and I talked about it a year later, I think what went viral, like what people were so interested in was that prior to that, I know for sure I had never seen anybody publicly say my kid attempted suicide over gender and I still didn't affirm. We hear so many stories of parents who do affirm when they're faced with the threat of their child harming themselves. But and it's totally justified why parents would feel that way too. But I had no guidance on parents who said no still. And there is this sense like, I hope I'm not playing with my kid's life. Part of things that I did to help when I was still saying no, despite the suicide attempt, we still won't be doing this. I made a nice little list of what can we do, if we still choose to not affirm. And the first step, remove them from social media, all social media. If you take them away from the people who are putting these ideas in their head or feeding these ideas, you're not going to get them out of it. I also removed her from her real life friends groups. There was no social media, no phone, and all the people in real life she was hanging out with that were involved in this, I cut ties with them too. If you really have to, I've heard of people changing schools, quitting jobs, but that is not practical for every parent to do. We can't quit our jobs or move schools. It's not something that you can just up and decide. But another thing I did for Anna is I got her involved in church, and we are not particularly religious people, but I felt like having, role models who were not involved in this. I wanted her to have a social life. You don't want to take your kid away from all the people that they say are their friends and offer them nothing in return. So I did want to offer her a social life. So we did get her involved in church, but not particularly church, just the youth group aspect of it. I would also recommend getting your kid involved in new hobbies, extracurricular activities, taking away that free time to just sit and focus on themselves helps. If they're just sitting, focusing on themselves, that anxiety grows. And also remain vigilant. Remaining vigilant is so important. Your kid is going to tell you they hate you. And she already attempted suicide. What if she attempted it again? You have to stay firm. It's so hard and you're alone because nobody wants to talk about it, but just have to stay as firm as you can. One thing that I actually did too, which I know this seems very dramatic, I spoke to the school and made them change her guidance counselor. This guidance counselor hadn't even spoken to her about anything about gender, but this was a guidance counselor who had pronouns in the bio and they were in their early 20s. So I was like, she will not use this guidance counselor. We're switching at my request. And that kind of stuff, you sound like you're being dramatic, but you cannot go too far when it comes to your children and saving them. A lot of kids that have this rapid onset gender dysphoria, they're autistic. If your child has a diagnosis of autism and they're dealing with this, I would say put it in their IEP. Rigid thinking is a trait of autism. Rigid thinking and trying to force them to use pronouns that they know aren't right. That's kind of being ableist, I suppose. Use whatever card you have available to you. If they're going to be manipulative, use the cards you have available and do what you have to do. There is nothing that is too crazy when it comes to this. It's important to remember your child needs their rights to the autonomy, but as your parent, ultimately, you make the decisions on how to safeguard your child. They don't autonomy is important for them, but if they can't make good decisions, you take that over until they're making better decisions. And then you give the decision making back to them. Sorry. One thing, when that tweet went viral and I got doxxed, they sent CPS to my home, who actually came to investigate because the reports that were anonymously made that I was abusing my child. Now, it's interesting, in the reports they made against me, they said that I was abusing my child for not affirming her, but also the social isolation of removing her from the internet, they claimed was abuse. This is real. It's in my report and everything. And one thing CPS is going to tell you is that we, how they kind of shirk responsibility is that they do not take your kids away for not affirming your kids. However, what happens is these kids are speaking to guidance counselors and school counselors and therapists who are telling them, do you feel safe with your parents not affirming you? And so these kids learn, I tell CPS, I don't feel safe. And if your kid says they don't feel safe, then that's how CPS takes them. Once CPS is taken from your home, if they're put into foster care, the foster system will affirm them. So it's a dark pipeline that's actually moving these and working against you. The non-affirmation itself, that's not where you get in trouble.
Brett, can we give it another minute and then move on?
I'm almost done. I think something really important is we have to give these children grace, because they are kids and they're influenced. But I think it's really important to give grace to the parents who are letting their children go through with the affirming surgeries. We need to give them grace because they are working with the information available to them. And every system that's supposed to help them is telling them, this is how you save your kid. And if you think that's how you're going to save your kid, that's what you'll do. Again, I think the reason people were interested in my story is because I had seen so many brave detransitioners speak out anyway, that I just knew it still doesn't necessarily make them happier. So let's just see what happens if I don't affirm even after the suicide attempt. I do think this tide is turning for the better. Anna tells me all the time that she sees desisters growing in her school. She says from the beginning of the school year, there's about 8 girls that she knows of who have desisted from this identity. So I do think the tide is turning for the better, but there's so much work to do, and we have to be diligent, and we have to be willing to put ourselves up there to protect these children. And we need to be, kind and forgiving to the parents who were doing the best with what they had. I think alienating parents who may have made the wrong decision for the right reasons is not the way that we want all parents to want to work with us to protect these kids. And we have to give grace to those we think made the wrong choices. So that's just my opinion on it. Sorry.
Thanks so much, Brett. So it's 20 minutes till the top of the hour. We're going to turn to Jeannette, and I want to just do a check on timing. I want to give Jeannette a full 10 minutes to talk, and then I want to go back to Chloe because we need to hear the rest of Chloe's story, which means either we're going to probably go past the top of the hour, or we're just not going to have time for questions. And so, Jeannette, feel free to go ahead, talk for 10 minutes, and we'll come back to Chloe, and then I'll check back in and we'll reassess. Okay?
Yes.
Cool.
I wanted to say hello to, I see some parents that I know in the chat, and that's so lovely. I'm going to read something that I've prepared on this, and it should hit a lot of the points for people who even know my story, but maybe will give a different view of how it's possible to legally lose your child. So I signed a parenting agreement 9 months ago, relinquishing all custody and decision-making to my ex-husband after 2.5 years and about $100,000 to attorneys and therapists. Now, why would I do that? I did it because it was the only logical conclusion that follows from 2 absolute assumptions that run the entire family court system, at least in my state of Illinois. The two assumptions that everything is based upon are: one, some children are born transgender, and two, if you don't affirm them, they'll kill themselves. So if you believe these two ideas and you care about children like I do, you would keep me away from my daughter too. More children will lose their parents, and I want to say it that way. More children will lose their parents as long as these two assumptions are proliferated in the media, though that's changing in the media, specifically around the suicide myth. We recently saw an article from the New York Times that talked about the concept of trans children, and did not mention or refer to the concept of suicide around that. That is a major change, and I think it has to be noted. So to provide some context and clarity, if you don't already know, I'm the Chicago mother who believes that my daughter is a girl. You can actually find her. I make it quite difficult, to be honest, to even find her, and many people don't exactly know who she is. I don't share her social media with basically anyone, but she's a beautiful young woman. So I am the mother with short hair who wears no bra, no makeup, doesn't shave, and looks like a lesbian, whatever that means. I'm the mom of a now 16-year-old girl named Sophia, who left our home when she was 12, sent me an email saying she was trans, and she never came back. I'm the mother whose daughter learned that the word unsafe is magical and puts adults under a spell that blinds them to observable reality and evidence, instead programming them to identify and isolate a single individual, usually a parent, many times mom, but more often dad. I'm involved with many fathers, good fathers. And they identify this person that is responsible for every feeling of discomfort that an adolescent girl might feel. I'm the mom whose daughter appears feminine, wears a bra, makeup, probably shaves, and even up to today, has never expressed any desire to physically change her body. I'm the mother who is only legally allowed to send letters in the mail that have gone unanswered for well over a year. I am the mom who called my only child by her chosen name, and I used pronouns that did not correspond to her sex for 2.5 years when I was in family court. I did that. I complied with that. And I bent to every request made by the family court system, and still it wasn't enough because I'm not a believer. There is no such thing as a trans child, and no child is so weak that she will kill herself if she hears her birth name. No one should be telling anyone in words or actions that sticks and stones may break your bones and words will literally kill you. That's not how suicide works, and more people should talk to suicide experts. People should be calling them and asking them and writing to them and tagging them on Twitter, since they have been quite silent on this topic. But we see that myth starting to fall, as we saw in the New York Times article. So 2 years ago, a group of mothers came together to form a nonprofit, Partners for Ethical Care. So on top of our full-time jobs and social and family lives, we dedicate time and resources to exposing the harms happening to children by the hollow concept of gender identity. We testify in state hearings, we stand in solidarity on the streets across the country, and we connect people to resources and to each other. We do it all with very little money. But we use what has sustained our civilization for centuries, the unpaid labor of women. We are all volunteers, and we look forward to the day that Partners for Ethical Care is dissolved, because it would be no longer necessary. But until then, I personally, and Partners for Ethical Care as an organization, chooses to put personal conflicts and any political differences to the side. We're glad to see states like Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, and Texas use the power of the legislature and executive directives to protect children from the gender industry. We want to see more of this. We're headed to Austin, Texas on April 20th of 2023 for our first big event to show solidarity with the executive directive describing the gender industry as child abuse, because it is child abuse. Codifying protections into law is necessary, and we need more people willing to testify on this issue in legislative hearings. It's time to speak up publicly. Testimony matters. There's nothing more important to me than this issue. Each day that passes, more children attend appointments at gender clinics, and more children will be surgically altered in ways that will force them to deal with feelings of loss that could have been prevented. This is an emergency. I personally feel quite strongly that children are the most vulnerable in our society, and I, much more than my daughter, is capable of coping with the psychological trauma of being separated from her. I'm an adult and she is a child. Children should be protected from the psychological and physical harms of gender ideology, and it's our responsibility to protect them. Children deserve to grow up safe from the psychological disorientation of this ideology. So when people say that they're scared to speak up, I tell them if they lose their friends, they're going to find new ones. We have all found each other in this way. I never knew any of you before this. If you lose your job, you're going to find another one. And if you lose your only child, I will teach you how to breathe again, how to smile again, and how to light your own path as you light the path of others. That's all.
Thanks, Jeannette. Jeannette, you're one of the most powerful speakers I know, and I appreciate your words, and I appreciate you sharing. I want to bring Chloe back. I want Chloe, if she's comfortable, if she's interested, to finish telling your story, and then let's wrap up at about 7:55 with all the speakers, and we can assess at that point whether to go past the hour. But I want to give you, Chloe, until sorry, not 7:55 for you, 7:55 for me, but 55 after the hour, wherever we are. So Chloe, you've got another several minutes. Please share with us whatever you wish to share about your story.
I'll try to make this quick. Thank you. So I got my mastectomy at 15, and at first I felt great because, you know, I genuinely believed myself to be a boy, and I really did look like a boy, save for the fact that I was shorter in stature than my male peers, and I had these big scars on my chest. And eventually, the honeymoon period, the magic of gender affirming care went away as I started to deal with the reality of the situation. I had to change my bandages and my dressings and look down at these huge wounds on my chest and deal with the loss of my breasts, which at first was something that I thought I wanted because, you know, I was a boy and men don't breastfeed. There is no need for me to have them. And I also didn't want the attention that they brought me. It wasn't until I started to feel, I realized that I started to miss my feminine appearance, and I missed having long hair and being pretty. And in secret, I would start to buy makeup and feminine clothing and just wear it in the comfort of my home, of my room. And I never told anybody about this. It wasn't until nearly a year later, when I was in a psychology class, that I realized that I regretted every single step in my transition. I had a lesson on child psychology and maternity, and I realized that breastfeeding is not only a means of just feeding your children, it also plays a role in the bond between you and your child, and that bond will foster healthy development in your child's emotional and psychological and social development and their other areas of their life. And that was when I realized what I had really taken from myself and potentially from my children. And that's when it really started to break down for me. Shortly after that, I stopped taking testosterone, and I was in a state of questioning my own experiences and my beliefs. And I had a period of introspection, and I realized that I didn't just have gender dysphoria. There were things that played a part in the onset of it for me. And I found that transition didn't really help with my dysphoria, that it actually had made me more conscious of the fact that I wasn't actually male, and that the longer I lived as a female, the better these feelings got, and the less frequently I dealt with them. And I realized that I had sexual trauma, that I had the fear of being assaulted again, and that I was downplaying it in my head this whole time because, you know, I told myself to man up, and I knew that I likely wouldn't get any help from it at school because they would probably give the kid a slap on the wrist and just have him get suspended and maybe potentially do something worse to me. And it also wasn't until I stopped transitioning that I actually got a diagnosis for autism. So not only was I neurodivergent and I had some trauma, I had several comorbidities, but by default, I wasn't able to consent in the first place because I was a child. Medical transition is something that affects every area of your life, of your health, in ways that you don't expect. I mean, even in the ways that they told me. I mean, they expected me to essentially have the mental faculties of an adult. And I remember my endocrinologist at 13 telling me, "Oh, are you aware that you may not be able to bear children as an adult? Are you aware that this may give you vaginal atrophy?" And at first, you know, because I was a kid, I thought, you know, I'm not really interested in having kids. But obviously my feelings on that have changed over the years. And I realized that because I was taking upon the social role of a male, and I had been on testosterone, I wasn't allowed to develop as a teenage girl should. This maternal instinct really wasn't allowed to grow. And I really don't think that, no, I know that is absolutely not something that children are able to consent to.
Thanks, Chloe. So if Brette and Jeannette can turn on your videos again, ordinarily we would have wrapped up the presentation part like 15 or 20 minutes ago and had plenty of time for Q&A, and we don't have time for that. I do think I want to stop this at the top of the hour in order to respect all the time of the panelists and all the time of the attendees. But I want to just say what you have all gone through is, I mean, it's just amazing, and how brave you are to speak. I don't know how you feel being called brave. People call me brave often, and I just think it's weird. I don't feel particularly brave. But that's this tonight's not about me. So I want to give each of you another minute or two to say anything that came out of the conversation, and then we'll close right at the top of the hour. We've got a few minutes here. So Brette, do you want to take, let's see, we've got 5 or 6 minutes. So Brette, do you want to take a minute or two and add anything that either you forgot to say or you want to add, or that came out of what Chloe and Jeannette shared?
I actually do, and I know I told you this earlier, but I've got to say this again, it is so important that the detransitioners are coming out and speaking like this, because if it weren't for detransitioners' bravery, I would not have been able to make the decision that I made. It was the experiences of detransitioners that made me decide, yes, after Anna's suicide attempt, when I was at that crossroads, what made me decide that I'm going to try the path untaken, I guess, was the fact that detransitioners are brave enough to share their stories. Like, I feel so grateful for, I mean, I'm so sorry about your experience, but talking about it the way you do is saving other girls' lives.
Thanks, Brette. Jeannette, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess this is advice that I give in my parent group. I run a Facebook group called Concerned Parents of Transgender, Non-Binary Kids, Teens, and Young Adults. And we talk about lots of in that group. Brette's actually in that group. But what we do is we tell parents that no matter what happens, you're going to be able to handle it. That's the thing. Fear kind of disappears when you realize your own power. And it's possible to stand up in front of legislators and in the public eye and all kinds of things. And like Brette said, most people are kind of internet warriors and keyboard warriors, and they don't actually show up at your house, even though they can Google the address. They don't actually do anything. Most of the time, it's just you in your own head being fearful. But you can make it through anything. And the way that you do that is by connecting with other people. And so that's what's possible. And so I encourage everybody to kind of dump out that whole idea that they can't make it, because you can, and you will.
Have all four of us testified before state legislature before? I think we all have. Oh, Brette has it? Well, Brette, you're up. You're next to testify. Okay.
I'm gonna tell you the truth is, where do you need me? I am ready to go,
Yeah.
because
We'll get
I
Brette.
have a hell of a story.
Awesome, awesome. And you know, I just want to second what Jeannette said. Look, if they were going to come after me, I am not hard to find. I am not hard to find. And I'm not going to say anything about the security of my building, but I'm not hard to find. I'm going to give the last word to Chloe. Chloe, you've got 2 minutes. Say whatever you want to say, sister.
Jeannette and Brette, I have to thank you both for coming on and speaking out your experiences as parents having to deal with this, because it's important to get the testimonies of people who have actually gone through the process of transition and have regretted it, but also of the parents of children who either identified as trans or continue or have been harmed by gender affirming care. So I have to thank you guys. And Brette, thank you for saying that we have to have compassion for all of the parents, even the ones who felt like they had to affirm their children, because I mean, my parents, they get a lot of hate from both sides, both trans rights activists and conservatives and just people all over the board telling me like, you should hate your parents instead. They're either like, they're using you to make money off of you or to push an agenda, or you should sue your parents for what they allowed to happen to you. But it's really not that simple. They were put in the situation where they were forced to make a decision, and they were scared that my life was on the line, and they were lied to. I mean, the doctors and physicians, they use euphemisms like top surgery to really downplay the seriousness of the situation. And I mean, they were fed all sorts of lies by these so-called professionals, and it hurt not only me, but my parents and my family. So thank you both so much. And thank you, Kara, for having all of us on here.
Thanks to all three of you. Thanks to everyone who tuned in tonight. This video will be up on YouTube as soon as we can get it up. Thanks to all the women and girls who are out there fighting. Thanks to all the moms. Thanks to all the young women like Chloe. Thanks so much to Jeannette for co-founding Partners for Ethical Care. Thanks to Brette for speaking out. Thanks to everyone. Stay strong, everyone. It's not easy out here, but we're going to do it, and we're going to win. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.